Hi there, thank you so much. Looking for my unmute button. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining another session in our 2021 Climate Action webinar series. My name is Karina Mills, and I am AIA California's Vice President of the Academy for Emerging Professionals, and today I'll be your moderator for this segment today. As you know, AIA California has developed a 20-part series focused on understanding and implementing the AIA framework for design excellence. This series will run through the end of this year, and this series will feature monthly hour-long general climate action webinars and 90-minute webinars that offer a deeper dive into technical topics. Additionally, AIA California has partnered with various organizations with like-minded goals to bring bonus content to you in the comfort of your own office. As always, all webinar content and additional resources will be available on AIA California website shortly after this session and each session. To ensure you receive the latest information on this series and other AIA California happenings, please make sure you are subscribed to AIA California's weekly newsletter Relevance by visiting aiacalifornia.org. A few quick housekeeping reminders before we get started with today's presentation. Today qualifies as one AIA HSW learning unit for those who are watching live, and AIA California staff will report these units for you. This session is also being recorded, as previously mentioned, will be available on AIA California's website with additional resources, and PDF of the presentation will also be available. And as a reminder, please use the Q&A function to ask any questions for today's presenter, and you can also like a question to move it to the top of the queue. Now, on to today's webinar. We are thinking about designing for economy. When thinking about designing for economy, we should focus on how good designs add value for owners, occupants, community, and planet, regardless of project size or budget. Today's session will examine the relationship between key building design elements, worker productivity, and provide working financial estimates of the benefits of these design features can have on the bottom line. Using this information, architects can deliver a convincing case to business owners and clients on building health and productivity in a language with business metrics that will be easily understood. I would like to quickly introduce today's presenter before handing it over to him. Simon Turner is the founder and owner of Building Cognition, LLC. Simon's interest for the past 30 years has been the impact of buildings and their features on human cognition and health. He has extensive expertise in building sciences as they relate to human performance, including HVAC, air quality, and microbiology. He became nationally recognized and published figure in these fields and is a sought after speaker. This background, integrated with extensive business management experience, makes Simon a powerful resource when it comes to understanding these issues as they relate to workplace and to the performance of businesses and their employees. Simon was recently honored as a life member of the Building Owner and Managers Association, also known as BOMA, is a past vice chair of GBCI Credentialing Steering Committee and a member of BOMA Orange County Advisory Board, and was a volunteer member of IWBA Ad Hoc Global Coronavirus Task Force. So with that introduction, I would like to turn it over to Simon. Please take it away.
Well, thank you. That was a nice introduction. I appreciate that, Karina. Let me share my screen. We'll see how that goes here, this one here. And hopefully you all see a PowerPoint presentation at this point. Good. So let me begin by just saying that, well, first of all, I'm not here to sell anyone anything, essentially. My background was that I came to this country back in 1987 and joined a little company that specialized in testing and looking at indoor air quality in commercial buildings, in particular the HVAC system. Back then in the early 80s, as we probably all know, there wasn't much, mid 80s, there wasn't much attention paid to indoor environments, at least the quality of them. And anyone who's my age will know that that's changed over the years. We've seen dramatic, greater awareness in the science of indoor environments, and we've begun to understand the correlation between people's performance in buildings and features of the buildings that drive that performance. And I became really interested in that area, and that's what I've studied over the years that I worked at Healthy Buildings, the name of this company. I became its CEO, let's see, when was that? 2006. And I sold the company to Underwriters Laboratories about nearly 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years in June. Having built it up, so at the point we sold it, we had like 100 employees and a real who's who of the commercial real estate industry as our client base. So it was a good match to sell Healthy Buildings to UL. So I've been lucky enough to have this knowledge base about indoor environments and what features of indoor environments drive productivity. But I've also had the ability to build a business and ultimately to sell it. So it's that combination that I'm trying now with my life to kind of pass on some of the knowledge I've learned over those years. And you know, your group was kind enough to invite me to speak on this issue. And my understanding is this particular subject, or the way I'm presenting it, is a little unusual for this group. But here goes. Let's see what you guys think of this presentation. And hopefully, at the very least, it'll provide some food for thought for how you interact with your clients and the design decisions that they make going forward. So we'll see what you think and how you feel this presentation, see how you receive it, essentially. So again, the big idea here is to examine which specific building features drive productivity. It's not, this presentation really isn't about sustainability per se. Obviously, there are some factors that interact or overlap with sustainability, but this is more about those CEOs and chief financial officers that you have to work with in your client base that are really driven by margins. If they run a business, they have to be driven by margins. And obviously there are things you can do with your buildings to help drive those margins. So we're going to kind of look at some of those features and put numbers to them. I mean, obviously you can debate these numbers, but I've tried to put some, both not only my experience, but some science to address those numbers. And I think this is a question you might want to ask your clients. What would you do for a point on your margin? I mean, it depends on the business. Some businesses run very, very fine margins. Some businesses, it's not so much their buildings, but their field activities that really drive their margins. It all depends, but there are many, many businesses out there that would, a CEO would give his right arm to add a point to his business margins, let alone 3 points. And so if you think this through carefully, you may be able to make a case to your clients that there are things they can do with their buildings that could add to their margins. And they you know, your clients will think about what they pay for that healthier building, essentially. This concept here is one that most of the people, I think, in this virtual room have heard before. But you know, when I speak to business groups with a similar presentation to this one, this is often the first time they've heard it. Most of us here understand that when you take a building as a whole, think of a building as a machine, if you like. 10% of the costs of that building are operating costs, power, and so on. 90% of it are in salaries and benefits of the people that work in the building. We spend about $3 a square foot on utilities, maybe $30 a square foot on rent, but $300 a square foot on payroll. And yet we often ignore the 90% here. And that is a very powerful argument, which you all on this call may well understand, but is maybe the first time some of your clients have heard that argument. I'm going to crib off a figure that is in the stock financial case for high performance buildings document. They kind enough to give me permission to use one or two figures from their document. If you haven't read that, document. We may have someone from stock on the call for all I know. I definitely recommend you read it. It's great. It's really well done. And they've done a great job documenting this case. So I think you can find it on their website. It's definitely worth looking at. And this is a great illustration they have here. Basically, the mass of evidence of science has built up over the last, 2 or 3 decades on relating performance to various aspects of the indoor environment in buildings: indoor air quality, thermal comfort, lighting, noise, views and biophilia, ergonomics, and location to amenities. These, as we're going to see, in my view too, are some of the most critical factors that can impact people's productivity. In other words, the science is out there. You're not having to make this up. You're not having to speculate. This science has been building up over the years, quietly in the background. Every time some new paper came out, being a nerd in this field, I would glom onto it. But as you can see, over the years, there's really a big body of evidence now to support the contentions that we might be making, during this presentation. First thing I think we need to really get our handle on, get our heads around, is what productivity even means, because it's going to mean different things to different businesses, essentially, to different people. What I try to do here is think about how you could boil down what the metrics of productivity are. Some you can measure easily, some not so easily, but obviously you can certainly measure absenteeism. What's that other word? Presenteeism. Come back to that in a minute. That's less readily measured, I think. We can certainly measure turnover and retention. Any business owner is going to measure those things. And every time you lose someone from a company, it's very expensive to replace. We can certainly measure revenue. I certainly hope any business owner would do that. Your HR department can help you with medical and health claims, obviously anonymized and aggregated. And then properly done surveys can tell us a lot about what employees think about their workplaces and their company in general. But, excuse me, let's go back to this presenteeism issue, excuse me. Let's talk about what presenteeism is. It's really you're there in spirit and you're there in body, but you're not really there in mind, essentially. Maybe you've got illnesses, chronic illnesses like stress, smoking, high cholesterol, obesity, things that are keeping you from being at your best, essentially, in the workplace. This concept is known as presenteeism, and it's probably the biggest cost an employees face when it comes to running an efficient business in terms of their personnel. About 70% of those costs are probably right there. People not operating at their optimum, essentially, because of chronic health issues that they're all dealing with. Let's look at this another way. Every business is going to measure productivity different. What I do when I give this presentation to business groups is I throw this slide out early, ahead of time, and I ask people to think about what aspect of their business, how would they measure productivity in their business? And it's going to vary, obviously, depending on the kind of business they have. If you run a law firm, you might measure it in, billing rates over time. If you run a manufacturing facility, you're going to measure productivity against payroll or something like that. But you can see here, some are much easier to measure, but some are highly relevant. One of the things you need to do is pick out 2 or 3 kinds of ways you would measure productivity, and then go out and measure it regularly. This is a concept that I used to preach to my employees all the time. You cannot manage what you don't measure. Pick some metrics and measure them. These kind of KPIs, if you're not measuring them, you really don't know what's going on in your business. So it's very important to do that. And I play, when I ran my company, I placed a very high priority on understanding the correct metrics for productivity and measuring them properly. And we had a quite sophisticated way of assessing those. So that's something definitely to think about. Anyway, let me come back to my nerdy bit here, which is how, what features of buildings essentially really matter when it comes to productivity. Now, there are people on this call I know that could debate me on this, of course, but I have boiled down what I, in my 30 years of experience, view as the most important factors that impact human productivity. Okay, again, let me emphasize, this isn't about sustainability, the most sustainable things in buildings, but the things that matter to human productivity. And they are these, in my view, in my opinion: indoor air quality, lighting and views, in particular connection to outdoors, thermal comfort, sound and noise, active design, which again is a concept you all probably well understand, but I have to explain it to a lot of business owners, and personal fitness. Those, in my view, are the 6 broad themes that contribute most directly to productivity and to health. Okay, so the first thing is, to help define what indoor air quality is. I like to explain to CEOs what that box is above their office, on their roof of their buildings or in the mechanical rooms that run the air through, because they have no idea how air gets into their spaces and how it's returned and what happens to the air. So I walk them through what an air handler looks like. And I make sure they understand that these are the main elements of good indoor air quality. Ventilation, and I cannot emphasize that enough. In my view, in my experience, that is the most important one. The way we filter our air, the hygiene inside this equipment, and sources of pollutants inside the buildings that build up, that need to be removed by the filtration and ventilation systems. A lot of people are surprised to learn that, most of the air they're breathing is recycled, only 10%, maybe 20%. The outside is exhausted to the outside air. And so I help people understand exactly how the system works, essentially. And then, of course, we have the elements, the primary elements of indoor air quality, the components that, as measured, particle concentrations, inorganic and organic gases like CO, CO2, VOCs, and microorganisms that you find in indoor air. Boy, has that become an issue in the last year or so. Those are the basic elements of IAQ. The way we ventilate buildings, we have an ASHRAE standard, 17 cubic feet per minute per person. We could potentially double that, and I'll explain why perhaps we should. And there's also better ways to use outside air, including thermal displacement ventilation. In fact, last week I was interviewed by Fast Company magazine, who then published an article in this week's issue about thermal displacement ventilation. I think it's an underrated ventilation system that could be much more used widely in this country. I'd like to see more use of it. So that's a little primer in less than 5 minutes about what indoor air quality is. Obviously, it's a massive subject, and there's been no more public focus on it than now with COVID, obviously. Who knew that this nerdy subject, which I studied for all these years, would now be on the front cover of the New York Times and every magazine in the country? Let's talk a bit about this COVID factor. Obviously, I've had the opportunity to think a lot about how air is COVID and other viruses and infectious vectors are distributed in indoor air. We've known and understood how these viruses get diluted through what's called the Wells-Riley equation. Goes back to research done in the 30s, essentially. What I've come to conclude, especially in the last year or so, is that the biggest single thing that we can do to control COVID in indoor air is ventilate spaces. This is why you see far less incidence of COVID transmission outdoors, 18 times less as studies that I've seen. The other debate that I've been having lately is whether, the role of filtration with COVID. I'm on an advisory board for an organization called Safe Traces, which releases DNA particles into the indoor air and then tracks their presence through the building. And they've been looking at the efficacy of filtration systems. And here's something I learned from looking at some of their studies, quite interesting, that if you upgrade the main filtration of the main air handling units, from say MERV 8 to MERV 13, up there in the main air handlers, it has hardly any effect on the infectious particle concentrations by the time they cycle through the entire building HVAC system and get back into the room. Those main system filters don't really seem to impact. So we're about to spend what appears to be a ton of money, especially in schools, on upgrading filtration systems. And I'm not entirely convinced that doing that is going to make a hill of beans. Now, that Safe Traces methodology did see improvements when you put local room air filters in place inside local rooms, but hardly any difference when you upgraded the filters in the main air handling units. But I think all of that is probably less important than the proper ventilation. Ventilation is probably the key. That's just my opinion anyway. We could debate that for the rest of the morning if only we had time. But let's move on a little bit to the subject at hand here, which is productivity and ventilation rates, what we're here to discuss. This is a review of the literature that looked at a range of different studies, and they found that there's a very strong correlation between productivity and ventilation rates, especially down at the bottom left-hand end of this curve, where most of the buildings are ventilated. So we've known for years about this correlation, but the cherry on the cake, you like that slide? The cherry on the cake was probably the CogFX study that was done by Harvard School of Public Health back in, what's now been some time now, 2015, where they took 24 managerial level participants, and they've got them to sit in this cube farm in Syracuse, New York, I believe it is, for 2 weeks. And they measured their ability to process information at the end of each day through some cognitive function tests that were well established and validated. And while they did that, they varied VOC levels, they varied outside air levels, they varied the carbon dioxide levels. They injected medical grade carbon dioxide into the space. And at the end of each day, assessed how these individuals were doing up here in their minds, how good they were at making strategic decisions, thinking on their feet, essentially how sharp they were, cognitive function. And for those who are familiar with this study, because it became quite famous, they saw really big improvements in cognitive function in those on those days when they were exposed to lower carbon dioxide levels, lower VOCs, but in particular when they doubled ventilation rates. It made a big difference to their cognitive function. They also looked at costs associated with improving ventilation, and they were relatively trivial, assuming you can make these changes to the air handlers, between $14 and $40 per person per year, essentially. So what I liked about this study was not just the findings, which actually weren't groundbreaking, to be honest. We've known this signal happens, especially with better ventilation, for years, but the way it was communicated, there was a lot of money and time put into communicating this information better than ever had done before. And the word started to get out into not into just the architectural community, you guys, but to the folks at BOMA and to the tenant base. And suddenly the light went on that, yes, there's a real difference to be made. And of course, that will help drive the market towards better quality buildings with respect to indoor air quality in particular. All right, I'm going to do some math now. Now, I don't want to scare you with this, but I remember reading that Stephen Hawkins was told that for every equation he put in his book, A Brief History of Time, he'd lose half his audience. So as I show this slide, I'm probably getting half the people clicking out of this presentation. Let's hope not. But I'm going to give you a made-up business that I'm made up here, just for fun, okay? I'm running a bank robbery consulting business, okay? I've got a good little business running here. Bank robbers from all over the country come to me for, information on how to break safes, getaway cars, how to case the joint, stuff like that. It's a good business. We have an annual revenue of $10 million a year. We have 33 employees in the different departments. We make a 10% margin, all right? So of my 10 million revenue, I make $1 million profit every year, all right? 10% margin. So with 33 employees, that means I've got just over $300,000 a year revenue from each employee. Hope everyone's with me so far. So if I can improve productivity by 3.5%, that means that each employee productivity enhancement is $10,000. Now, because my margin is 10%, that means my profit gain per employee is $1,000. With 33 employees, my profit gain is $33,000. My margin gain is 3.3%. So my margin's gone from $1 million to $1,033,000. So that's just a kind of a back of the envelope calculation you can make, but it's the way you assess what productivity improvements should be. That's how you measure it, essentially, okay? Now, the reason I picked that 3.3% there is that looking at the data with respect to improved indoor air quality, and I drew this from studies done by Jun-Hoo Choi from USC Architecture Department, he's estimating on average a 3.5% from improved productivity from IAQ. I think that's a very, very defensible figure. It's one of the strongest figures you could go to a client with and say, if you improve your IAQ, you could expect this kind of number. It may seem like a small number, but there's a concept called net present value. Once you make these changes, you start to see an improvement every year. You see that margin added to your baseline essentially every year. So you have the concept called net present value. So that 33,000 a year adds up to 250K per year, or 250K rather, net present value. Now you're starting to talk about real money here. So that's worth thinking about. Now, as we go through this, I'm going to give you a net present value for each of these different elements of building quality that we're talking about here. And then we'll start to think about what that might do to the value of the business. Because at the end of the day, a business owner is looking long-term to the value of his business when he exits one day, okay? So the next concept I want to talk about is this concept of biophilia, access to windows, access to views. Again, most of the people on this call will understand the concept of biophilia, the fact that humans evolved in outdoor air, surrounded by nature. And the more I've been working in this field, the more convinced I am that that's really become one of the most important things we can do, is connect ourselves as human beings back to nature. We did not evolve to sit in these boxes for 90% of our time. One of the fun things I used to do when we all used to meet in person, remember those days? Was I'd have an audience in front of me and I would say, okay, anyone who's spent an hour outdoors, please stand up. And, you know, maybe, I don't know, 90% of people would stand up because they'd been for a walk the prior day. Well, if you spend 2 hours outdoors, most of the people would sit down. By the time I got to 10 hours outdoors, maybe had one dude still standing up, you know, probably worked outside in some work setting. But most of us spend nearly all of our time in these boxes. We live in these boxes. But when they've done homework on this, they're finding massive improvements in productivity and cognition when you can give people access to windows and views. Again, I don't believe any of this is really going to come as a surprise. Actually, let me go back to this slide. Yeah, because there's a study I just want to tell you about briefly. Sacramento Utility District, SMUD, they have a call center up there, which is a great place to measure productivity because everyone's on the phone, they log all these phone calls, they're able to measure productivity very well. Access to views in particular made a 6% increase in performance when their employees had access to windows. Made a really big difference. Office workers with windows experienced 46 minutes more sleep per night on average. 46 minutes more sleep. What would you give for that? It makes a big difference. So I just wanted to, you know, just touch on that, some of those studies. You can do your own homework on that, but it's pretty clear. Now, let me get back to this slide. This is a concept, again, most of you all are probably familiar with, called circadian lighting. You change the color of the light during the course of the day. We wake up to bright blue light, sunshine in the morning, and we go to bed in the evenings with the sun going down and the lights turn redder. That's what we evolved to, right? The color temperature changes during the course of the day. So you can buy programmable LEDs now. Here's an example in this image of a care center for seniors in Sacramento, where they have bright blue light in the morning, a warmer light in the afternoon, and this lovely warm amber light in the evening. And they saw much better sleep outcomes with the elders that are in this care center doing this. Now, just as a personal experience, I bought off on this. So when we redid our kitchen here in my house, from where I'm speaking now, I dropped $2,000 on circadian lighting with a company called Health, with an E at the end. And they sold me these light bulbs that I installed throughout our house. And so my lights turn amber during the evening. And the first night they went in, it made a hell of a difference. I was ready to sleep by 9 p.m. or so. It really makes a difference to my sleep quality. But also, where they put this in schools, they found the bright blue light in the morning has a big difference to children's performance. They're seeing a double-digit rise in SAT's test scores following the installation of tunable LEDs at Lindbergh High School. I believe this in Colorado. This stuff works. It's very interesting. So definitely something to consider. And when I give this presentation again to business groups, and I ask for feedback at the end, this is the thing that the CEOs are saying they're going to jump on first, changing their lights, because it's relatively easy and simple to do. So a little feedback on that. So I'm going to go back to my bank robbery consulting business now and claim a 6% productivity enhancement from getting my lighting and my windows and views correct. So, you know, that's a 60 grand increase in my margins, and that's a 460K net present value improvement, right? Let's move on to thermal comfort. Again, very solid data on this. It's very clear that you get the biggest bang for your buck in the low 70-degree Fahrenheit. When you get a little colder than that, people get less productive. And absolutely, when it heats up beyond that, people get less productive. Now, obviously, lots of variables here. Women tend to like it warmer than men. Lots of things change. There are more wars over thermostats in my 30-year career at Healthy Buildings than anything else. But again, there's low 70s is where people tend to be at their most productive. So I will claim a 2% improvement based on some of the science that's out here regarding thermal comfort. And that's another 20K and a net present value of 150K with thermal comfort. Now, this is a fun one, background noise and speech. When I give this presentation live, what is a hoot to do is to get everyone in the room talking at once. And of course, no one can hear a damn thing when that happens. And of course, it's because our brains can only channel one person speaking at a time. If you have more than that going on, our brains just can't handle it. You cannot process two channels of speech at once. And this is why we have constant arguments over debates over the open plan office versus enclosed offices, and chatter going on in the background. There's one study that showed, disruption from people being talked over results in a 2/3 loss in productivity. It's an enormous impact on productivity. Now, for my bank robbery consulting business, oh, by the way, here are some of the things you can do. And you guys, of all the people I speak to, know about this. You can have an optimum background noise. You can do sound barriers, sound absorption, all these things. And in particular, flexible workspace options, which I'm going to touch on in a bit. But again, going back to my bank robbery consulting business, our safe breaking department needs it quiet. And they were getting too much background noise to do their work properly. So for my particular business, I'm claiming a 10% improvement, $100,000 improvement in my personnel productivity. That's a 750K net present value over time. So that's, for my particular business, a big one. And as we're going to see, every business is going to have different numbers depending where their baseline is, of course. Accept that. The next issue is active design. Really what this is about what we're doing to our infrastructure of our building to prevent people becoming sick, essentially. And there are lots of things that the architectural community can do. Now, look, I'm not pretending I'm an architect, but I hope what I'm talking about here you can relate to. And again, I generally have to kind of explain exactly what active design is. So I'm going to go over like 6 aspects of active design, starting with encouraging activity. We've all seen themes about getting people to use stairwells, and I love these little signs you could put very simply in buildings to encourage people to stay away from their elevators and use stairwells. And what with COVID now, there's another reason not to use elevators. Get people to run up and down stairs where they can. So, things you can do in your buildings to encourage activity. Ergonomics, obviously, the big one. I found this little program on the internet where you can put your own dimensions in for your personal height and get your ergonomics correct. Makes a big difference. We'll talk about stand-up desks in a minute because I think it's very interesting. Actually, let's do that right now. Here's Donald Rumsfeld. He was one of the pioneers of stand-up desks in the Pentagon. You may not always agree with Donald Rumsfeld's policies, but he was a pioneer when it came to active design, when it comes to furnishing, as it happens. Stand-up desks went through our offices like wildfire. They became, I don't want to call it a fad, but I had employees come to me all the time. Simon, can I spend $350 on a stand-up desk? And I always said yes, because if they wanted to try it out, it could make it, and it improves an individual's productivity, of course. I tried stand-up desks. I didn't like it at all, but a lot of people did. And what works for some people, that's great. The other thing with respect to furnishings is I'm a big believer in giving people choice about where they work through the course of the day. And this comes back to how we evolved, essentially. We didn't evolve to just sit around in a cube and sit in one space for 8 hours. Of course, we're not going to be at our most productive if we do that. If we can give our employees the choice, different places to sit and work in buildings during the course of the day, they're going to be more productive. Sometimes they like a quiet space, a little nook where they can focus on a task. Sometimes they like to be collaborative and they want to sit across a table and chat with their colleagues. Other times they may need to just walk or have a higher level bench to sit up at, simply because it gets them moving, gets their blood flow. And obviously access to light is important. So I like this particular steel case image because you can see choices at work. I think that's a really important feature to give our employees if we can. And I think it's one you could easily sell to your clients, essentially. What else here? Commuter support, bike to work. We've heard all this before. Get employees at their companies' shower facilities, maybe not as nice as this one, but a facility where they can, after coming to work, using either bicycles or what in Britain we call Shanks's pony. If you've heard that expression, it means walking, to get some activity in them before they come to work. Speaking of walking, here's a Walmart headquarters conceptual design, walkable space, get people walking between and in buildings, get the blood flowing, get them walking. And then the last thing just to touch on is get incentive programs in place to get people fit activities. For instance, if you're going to do a group team building activity, do a beach cleanup or something like that, where people can get out. What we tried to do in our company was to kind of make it hip to be active, do things that involved activity, to make people feel a little peer pressure to want to get up and out and be active with their lives. Be classy about it, obviously, but where you can make people feel like they'd be welcomed if they're doing something which involves exercise. It's just a cultural thing, essentially. It's all to the good. So that's really what active design is and how I try to explain it to business managers, essentially. So in my company, I'm going to claim a 4% productivity improvement there, $40,000 improvement, and that's got a 300K net 10-year net present value. Okay? Soon these numbers begin to add up, as you can see. Then the last feature I wanted to touch on here is personal fitness. I was a member of an organization called Vistage, which was a peer group of CEOs. We meet once a month, 15 of us, with a retired CEO chairing the organization, the group. And these 15 CEOs would spend the day talking about their business issues. And it was very good, actually, because we'd hold each other accountable. And it took some of the loneliness of being a CEO out, because you had people you could relate to and people you could bounce ideas off. But we often had speakers. And one of the speakers we had came and talked to us about personal fitness and things that we could do personally and with our employees to make us healthier. He'd talk about stress, nutrition, sleep quality, things to improve our immune system, and the kind of training that could be done with employees to get them fitter than they were. This particular speaker, Dan Miller was his name, it was very profound, and he changed my life, actually, and it changed the way I eat and exercise in particular. I dropped 15 pounds within, I don't know, 3 or 4 months of spending that day listening to him, just by focusing on a few simple things. You know, what we're doing here is creating a culture of wellness in a business. And that's not necessarily something architects can do necessarily, but maybe the way they shape the building, the way they talk to their client, you talk to your clients, it can make a difference. But this can have a profound effect if you can get people to really think about how they're living their lives and the effect it can have. And there's no better time than now, obviously, after this era of COVID. So in my case, I'm claiming a 5% improvement there, $50,000, and that's a 380K net present value over time. So let's roll all this up, okay? Indoor air quality, lighting and views, thermal comfort, noise and sound, active design, and personal fitness. You add these features up over time, and you could potentially move a margin for the hypothetical company I was playing with there from 10% to 13%. That is absolutely worth a CEO's time to start thinking about. But look, I want to make something clear. I'm not claiming necessarily that one adds on top of the other like that. Every business and every building is different. You're going to start with a different baseline. You may start with a building that is very well ventilated, but has acoustic issues. You may start with a building that, you know, thermally is fine. They've got great VAV system. They have no problem controlling temperature. But you know what? The way they're running the business inside, they really could do better with the group of unhealthy people that need to get out more, get more exercise, and focus more on personal fitness. It's all going to depend. But somewhere there's a margin gain to be had, somewhere between $0 and $213,000 a year in my case. And a net present value somewhere between $0 and $2.3 million over 10 years. But here's the other thing. The money that adds up here doesn't stop with this net present value. It adds to the value of the company overall. If you're improving margins, you're improving the EBITDA. And anyone who runs a business is very familiar. Earnings before interest, depreciation, taxes, and amortization. A business is valued not on its revenue, but its EBITDA. Okay. So if you move a business's EBITDA up from, say, $1 million to 1.2 million, the enterprise value, when you come to sell it, is going to be a multiple. It's typically, depending on the business, could be 6. But if it's a IT business, it can be crazy multiples. You know how IT is. But let's say 6. That business's multiple means that that business, instead of being worth 6 million, could be worth 7.2, 7.3 million. That's real money at this point. So anything you can do to improve your EBITDA is going to have an improvement with its multiple, which will, with its EBITDA, which will roll out to a much improved value for the company's business. At the end of the day, that's really going to be a convincing case for a business owner one day. I'm going to come back full circle now to another graphic that was in this stock document, just to show that these numbers I'm throwing out here for productivity improvement are not out of the mainstream or completely, unrealistic. This document from stock shows very similar numbers to the ones I've come up with. Mine are actually more conservative than these are generally here, looking at some of these elements here. So I'm by no means the only one saying this is pretty mainstream at this point. So I want you to think about this. I want you to think about your clients, where they are on this spectrum of performance, their buildings, what they could improve. And while we're at it, why not think about what you could do in your workplace to maybe improve lighting, access to views? What do you know about your ventilation system? Just how much outside air are you really bringing in? How's the noise in your space? And what are you doing with your culture to improve people's personal fitness? Overall, thinking about that productivity, those productivity metrics. Just think about it. If you don't want to think about it, that's fine. I have no dog in the hunt for your business or your client's business, but it's something to really think about. Lastly, before I hand the gavel back, essentially, let's think about the implications of COVID on commercial real estate and you know how it impacts what we've been saying here. Let's think about where the money is going, essentially. I personally believe that we'll see a gradual migration to the suburbs because prestigious addresses for high-rise buildings are not going to mean so much anymore as we tend to work more from home and have these more distributed hubs where maybe we work out in the suburbs and people only come to their business physically maybe 2 or 3 times a week, if that. They also want easier access by car, maybe less use of mass transit. So we may see some kind of fundamental changes in the way commercial real estate works. It'll be slow because of long lease terms. But I also want you to think about, and this comes back to everything I've been saying here, is that it's content that's going to drive the commercial real estate market going forward rather than just square feet. Think about the way we used to buy cars. It used to be, you know, back in, I don't know, 30s, 40s, 50s, last century, the bigger the car, the longer the wheelbase, the more expensive and prestigious it was. It doesn't work like that anymore. Nowadays, the best cars are the ones with the best content about the way they make you feel, whether it's the engine or the technology inside those cars. We're still a little bit thinking about space, about how big the space is, but I think in the years to come, we're going to think more of our workspaces about the quality of those workspaces and the content inside those workspaces being more important than just where they are and how prestigious they are, essentially. So, you know, the most dangerous competitor right now for these high-rise buildings is probably the homes we live in right now. And to bring back people into spaces, we need to think about them as destinations with a lot of high-quality content, and it addresses, and it should address, all of those productivity features we spent the last 45 minutes or so discussing. So think about which elements of your building, clients' buildings, are impacting employee performance. What ROI is really there right under their nose if they started to address this or you help them address it? And what impact you're going to see with them in the post-COVID era. So that's, Karina, what I have to say to your group. And I'm very happy to take questions. Thank you. I'll disable screen sharing at this point.
Thank you so much, Simon. I'm going to ask if AI staff can turn my video back on. So we do have a couple of questions that I'd like to have you share. First of all, there's a question asking, have any performance measures surveys been conducted for school occupancies?
Yes, there's been, I mean, I can't name them off the top of my head, but there's been lots of studies that have looked at learning environments. In fact, I mentioned one of them, which is this lighting one and this effect on SAT scores. There are plenty of studies out there that have looked at learning environments. And in particular, I could see the ventilation issue being one that there's a lot of benefits to learning environments when you improve cognitive function, obviously, by improving ventilation. And it comes down to, you know, there's about to be a shed load of money thrown at schools. I think I saw a figure of $55 billion about to be spent on American schools. And I spoke to a school superintendent out in Las Vegas this morning, and he said the phone is just ringing off the hook from people selling gadgets and devices, wanting to sell them devices to spend this money. And I am personally a little bit concerned that it's not going to be spent well. I think it's very, very important there be some wisdom about how we spend money. In fact, I'm curating a session with the Altru Institute in mid-April, 14th of April, in Vegas, which is going to look at this very issue about how best to spend all this money. I hope our group, or your group, AIA, can help schools spend it properly and make sure it's not spent on snake oil.
Thank you so much for that, Simon. And it looks like The next question is asking about mental health and wellness. This is specifically addressing some recent violence. Do you have any suggestions on providing safety? It's a little just, I think maybe part of the culture question.
Well, I mean, that's in a way, probably I'm going to take my indoor air quality science hat off and put my business manager's hat on for that, really just to talk about culture, in that, you know, what I tried to, I mean, there's an old expression, I think it was Peter Drucker once said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what he means by that is that if you cannot impose culture, but you can create it over time. And if you can create a culture where people love your company and they love coming to work, they don't really regard it as a chore to come to work. They love the environment that you've created. You're going to have a lot fewer hassles and a much less threatening environment just organically. You know, you can't really say, there will be no shootings in my office. It doesn't work like that. All I think you can do is create a positive culture by making it clear you really cherish your employees, much more than what you pay them, much more. I see it time and time again. Just a few words to some employees to say how much you cherish them can make all the difference. There's a lovely story that I'm going to share with you. Well, it's not lovely, but it's instructive, where a guy walked into his boss's office and said, I'm leaving, I'm handing in my notice. And the boss sat back on his chair and said, you are? What could I have done to prevent that? And the guy said, anything. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say there. The boss never really committed to that employee, never really cherished him. And so that's what that means when the boss, the employee who resigned finally said to him, you could have done anything, but you did nothing. So I don't know, things like that. Create the right culture.
That's a great response. Thank you so much for that. Next question, please run through the net present value calculations, including the capitalization rate. This concept is also used for life cycle cost analysis.
Yeah, I can't really get into that now. I mean, there's a bunch of math on that involved. I could probably look up a link and send it to Paul there who asked that. It's just some math. It's pretty straightforward CFO math to do net present value calcs. The best thing for me to do probably is to suggest anyone who's interested in that, just Google how do you calculate net present value, and you'll see see how you do it. It's not particularly complicated. You can plug it into internet calculators and come up with net present value. You just need to know the number you start with, your discount rate, and the period you want to calculate it over, and it'll pop up for you. Paul, I'm not dismissing the question, but it's pretty straightforward. It isn't rocket science. But if you Google net present value calculator, they pop up left, right, and center on the internet.
Thank you. And then do you expect a glut of existing commercial real estate after COVID-19?
Well, it depends. I'm going to BOMA's convention in July in Boston in person, which is a great vote of confidence in real estate. They're holding it in person. And their theme is boom, now everything's changed. And it's going to depend, I think, on how commercial real estate as an industry responds. Again, I think the key will be to create destinations out of workplaces where people relish coming to those spaces. I don't think people will come there 5 days a week anymore. I think we're going to have plenty of people working from home, but no one's going to want to work from home forever. I don't know about you, Karina, but I really miss seeing people. You know, and it's not the same over Zoom. So I think it would be unwise to write the industry off. But I think the smart owners of buildings will change them dramatically. And this is why this presentation I just given is getting good traction, because they get it. They have to make these changes to make people want to come there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this question just came in. Everyone is working remotely, and that will become the future. No control over how people are working within their spaces, right? So you're suggesting all these things, and yet we're facing a hybrid work environment future. Any suggestions on what we can do?
Well, again, I'm gonna put that business hat back on, you know.
Yeah.
Do you remember I said earlier in this presentation about measuring metrics? Okay, so I think every employer, every CEO needs to sit down with his team and really think about what metrics matter, which metrics matter in their particular business, how they're going to measure them, and then put those measurement metrics in place and really do it. I mean, I don't mean like come up with something, whether it be, well, we're going to measure utilization rates, a common one in consultancies, you know, and then you say that, but you don't even track the data. You just say you're going to do that, and you put something in place, but you never go back to it. You go back to those numbers monthly, and you analyze them closely. And if they need to be tweaked, you do it. Now you can do that whether people are working from home or work in the office. You can see their performance. You can see who your stars are and who your laggards are. I mean, there's some truth to 80% of the work gets done by 20% of the people. Certainly 80% of the sales get done by 20% of the salesmen. So find out who those people are, and you can really only do that by measuring them, coming up with metrics of work for your particular organization. But if you do not come up with KPIs for your organization as a CEO, you are failing in your duty. You really are.
So I think putting your indoor air quality hat back on for the last couple of questions. There's somebody asking also about the home environment. How do you find out about indoor air?
Yeah, one of the things that really surprises people is when I say, do you know that most homes have no outside air ventilation? Not unless you open the windows or the doors. They're just not ventilated with outside air. Which means that the indoor air quality in your workplace, your office, is probably substantially better than the air quality in your home for that very reason. So, you know, the only outside air that gets into most homes is through leakage. They're on negative pressure, and they suck air in through gaps in windows and doors and things like that, and they don't have formal outside air intakes. Mine certainly doesn't. In my air handler here, I've got no outside air. I happen to live in Southern California. I'm very lucky here. I keep my windows and doors open all the time because I value outside air. I know how important it is. I don't know if you can see with my screen here, my door is right there. And if it wasn't for the fact I'm giving this presentation, I need to keep the noise down, I have that door open all the time to flush my workplace with outside air. I can't recommend it highly enough. And I'll just mention, I have a friend who runs a business. They happen to have a conference room with a big roll-up garage door. And he says the difference when they undo that door, when the weather's allowable, and have that door fully open, so a whole wall is open to the outside air, the difference it makes to the dynamism in their meetings is palpable.
Excellent advice. Always, if you can get fresh air in somehow, some way, do it. Okay, well, it looks like we are out of time. So thank you again to Simon for an awesome presentation and for all those questions and answers. For all of the 125 participants who are still on the call, AIA California staff will submit your AIA CE credit, and it should appear on your transcript in a couple of weeks. And as always, there are more resources available to everyone on AIAcalifornia.org/climate action. And with that, just one more thank you to Simon and all of our attendees. It's been a great program, and I hope everybody goes to the California website for the link in those PDFs to go with it.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.